All right. Hi, this is Sarkis. I want to talk a little bit about uh, the pitfall of positive thinking. There's a lot of, um, sometimes so-called spirituality gets co-opted by this positivity movement. So the first thing I want to say is that if I were to be living in a world that's filled with negativity or positivity, obviously I have a preference of being in a world of positivity. So there's nothing wrong with taking like kind of an endless stream of negative thinking and redirecting my attention towards a more positive, loving, and inclusive line of thinking. I think that's really valuable. But it dead ends in a certain way for me because of this. I'll explain something. So because thinking, like every other experience there's the absolute unconditioned source of everything. And I call that awareness. Other people refer to it as enlightenment or absolute love or the Tao. But basically, if I'm having an experience, that experience has to arise within something. I'm calling that something an awareness, but we can conceptualize it right now as, let's say, a space. So if I'm having, let's say, the feeling of happiness or the emotion happiness, happiness arises in awareness, right? The only way that I'm experiencing happiness is because it's arising within a sentient field of awareness, right? If there was no awareness, I wouldn't even be aware of the feeling happiness. The same is true of thinking. Thinking arises out of awareness and is known as and by awareness. Okay, so that means that thinking is a modulation of awareness, right? The source of thinking is awareness itself. So if I get into my mind and I'm in my thoughts and I'm identified only as those thoughts, I'm going to have the experience of feeling limited, right? Again, there's nothing wrong with feeling limited, but what comes with the sense of being separate or limited, if I'm identified as a limited, separate self, the way that that is impacted as in my heart, in my mind, and in my body, I experience that as suffering, right? That's what suffering is. Suffering is the belief that I am separate and limited. That's basically what suffering is. I can have an experience of pain, like if I bang my arm with a hammer, there's a sensation that happens and it's like, wow, right? But if I don't focus down only in that one sensation and separate from everything else, I won't experience suffering around it. I'll experience an intense sensation, right? And I might even want to label that sensation as pain. But I only suffer when I cut myself off from the rest of the totality, the rest of my source. So that's also a little commentary on pain and suffering, the difference between those two things. So why is positive thinking ultimately not the end game? Is because obviously negative thinking is limiting and cuts me off, right? If I identify with negative thoughts, I'll feel a sense of separation. That sense of separation resides in the heart as a low-level fear and anxiety and suffering, right? Again, nothing wrong with that. I just would prefer, in myself, I prefer not to suffer. So making the shift from negative thinking to positive thinking will feel better in my heart, in my mind, and in my body. But if I identify too strongly or exclusively with positive thinking, I will still also have a low-level feeling of anxiety and fear and suffering, because I will subtly, unconsciously believe that I am separate from my source, the source of all thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions, which is awareness, which is what I am. Okay, again, I don't want to knock positive thinking, but please know that the source of all thoughts is awareness. And to drop back into that if you want to have an experience of not suffering. Because there's no suffering in the unconditioned absolute. All right. I love you. Thanks for listening.